I think this is our 9th class on Bible geography. We're going to be in chapter 8 on conquest and settlement this evening. And so we're moving out of the wilderness wanderings, and now we're going into the land of Canaan. And so here, as they're going up, we talked about this last week, they had to pass around Edom, and the way was very discouraging. They went around Moab, and that shows mercy even to the descendants, to the brothers, if you will, the descendants of Israel, Edom being the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, Moabites being the descendants of Lot, and they went around, and now they're going to come into the land of promise this way and cross over the Jordan River in between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee in this region, just on the other side of Jericho, over in that area. So we'll look at that tonight. So in our book, it says that Canaan had a large mixed population. They would not give up their territory easily, willingly. Remember when Israel went to spy out the land of promise, what kind of land was it? What kind of people lived there? Giants. Yeah, giants. And what were their cities like? He said their cities were fortified and they were walled. So I found this picture, a video of a Canaanite city, and I'm not sure what is what, frankly. I'm not an archaeologist here, but this is an overview picture of a Canaanite city in this time period, 2000 to 1550, so just after Moses, and it shows a wall, and it shows a gate here, and some kind of a water system over here, and a Canaanite city. So it gives you an idea a little bit of how their cities were built. So Joshua says in Joshua chapter 3, verse 10, and the verse is there. Edgar, could you please read that verse?
And Joshua said, "Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Hivites, and the Perizzites, and the Gishites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites."
Okay, and down in your notes under point 4, there are other verses that reference these 7 nations, even in one place in Deuteronomy. If you also go to Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. And who's got that verse for us, please? Okay, Jennifer, you get a star for reading this with all the big words there, okay?
Deuteronomy 7:1. And the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations, greater and mightier than thou. Okay, so there it is again. And so there's a number of verses like that, 7 nations. And here God says he will without fail, through Joshua, without fail, drive them out. So who are these people and where did they live? So Canaanites lived in fortified cities along the coastland areas. So in this area, along the coasts. And we'll see that actually in the battle of Deborah and Barak against the Canaanites. It was fought over here in the valley of Megiddo area and about around Mount Tabor. So we'll see that the Canaanites were particularly over here. So they lived, and here's the blank, number 1, along the coast and in the great valleys. We looked at this verse last week, but it is the intelligence report of the spies that went out in Numbers chapter 13 and verse 28, 29, where we talked about the people and the cities and then the different people groups. And where does he say the Canaanites live? In verse 29 of Numbers chapter 13. Yeah, that's what it says. It says they lived by the sea. Okay, so they lived along the sea and by the coast of Jordan. So they also lived in the great valley areas. In other words, the flatter areas. And we're going to see how the Canaanites had a lot of chariots. What good are chariots up in the mountains?
not a whole lot of good. They would be much more devastating on the flatter terrain. So the Canaanites. Then the Amalekites dwell, again in Numbers chapter 13. Where do they dwell? Where does it say in verse 29? They dwell in the mountains or in the hill country. That's number 2. And the Amalekites, where do they live? In what area do the Amalekites live?
The land of the south.
The land of the south. And what's that Hebrew word? We're looking at that. That would be the Negev. So they live down here, even below this area, in the Negev. And who finally settled in the Negev? And what town was that? The great patriarch finally settled in the Negev region. Abraham in Beersheba. Okay? So it says here that the Amalekites roamed in the Negev. The Jebusites, Hivites, Perizzites, Hittites occupied villages and towns in the hill country, in this area here. Okay, so those different names of those different people. It says, they also lived in the mountains. So there you go. That's a little bit of the people of the land and where they lived. It tells us in the Bible. And again, the geography of where the different people lived and where they were comfortable living. You know, some people still are more comfortable in the city. Some people are more comfortable on the mountains, you know. Some people will like it flat in the flat, you know, and people get accustomed, you know, farmers in Kansas get accustomed to that flat land and they're comfortable living there. Whereas if you lived on that flat land, you might go crazy. There's not enough people. It's too flat here. It's too wide open or whatever, you know. So Joshua now tells the initial phase of conquest. Judges describes the ongoing struggle. So that's the blanks there. Joshua tells the initial phase, and Judges describes the ongoing struggle. Favorite verse of mine in the book of Joshua that tells about that ongoing struggle is even when Joshua was old and towards the end of his life, in Joshua chapter 18, for example, and verse number 3. So this was after they had been fighting the battles, after they had made war a long time with all those kings. It still says in Joshua chapter 18, verse 3, who's got that verse for us?
And Joshua said unto the children of Israel, how long are ye slack to go to possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers hath given you?
Okay, so they still had not possessed all the land. And if you even go back to Joshua 13, verse 1, when Joshua was old, stricken in years, the Lord said, thou art old, stricken in years. And he says what in Joshua 13:1? There still is a lot of land to be possessed. And so Joshua tells the initial phase, and there's obviously an ongoing struggle. And that's what God said, even through Moses. He says, I'm going to give you that land bit by bit, not all at once. So, little historical background. From 1200 to 1000 BC, the ancient Near East experienced change. Traditional powers collapsed. New groups emerged. The distinguishing characteristic of this age was the appearance of new people groups, including Israel, coming out of Egypt into the land of promise. Another group that came in during this period of time, our author tells us, are these sea peoples, and then these became known as the Philistines. The Philistines, that's the last blank, letter A, the Philistines, the sea peoples. And that's on page 77 in our book. So he talks a little bit about where these sea people came, and he says that they swept through the Near East, coming from the north, coming from the west, and there's on page 76, map 34, there's the routes of the sea peoples coming across the Mediterranean Sea, coming down from the north, and coming into this land of Canaan. It was a very desirable place back then, still is, to live in that region. Fruitful. So they swept from the north, from the west. Egypt was often a focus of their attacks as they tried to get a foothold of land. And then, of course, Egypt pushed them out. And so they settled predominantly in the land of Canaan. And the Philistines, of course, especially along this coast, the western coast of Canaan land, the Philistines. This is where they settled in, where we even see them in Bible days. And often being thorns in the side of Israel, the Philistines, later settled on the southern coast. So then the power vacuum, he talks a little bit about that. Under that point, he says, as Israel appeared in Palestine, seeking to drive out native populations, they were but one of various people groups seeking new territories. So again, a little redundancy here, but the Philistines, that's number one, settled along the southern coast of Canaan. As well as in the mountainous areas, he says. And the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites. Also, that's the blanks number 2. And that's there's a picture on, you see page 77, on page 77, at the top right-hand corner of that page, he says, in the Transjordan, you see that? The kingdoms of Moab, Edom, and Ammon tightened their grip on the land they had occupied. So again, as the descendants of Esau and Lot grew, they needed to find a place, so they settled on this side of the Jordan, the Transjordan region. So the point is when Israel went into the land, there had been a lot of fighting going on. People trying to find their land and find some peace along the way. And now here comes Israel, 2 million people, comes into the region. So that leads us to Joshua's conquest and his campaigns. Okay, so Joshua 1 through 11 narrates his campaigns into Palestine. After Joshua's death, there was still much land left to be conquered. Israel had a strong foothold in Canaan, however, from which to expand. So letter A, Joshua miraculously crossed the Jordan River, of course. So they come across the Jordan River, right on the other side of Gilgal. Of course, they sent the spies over there. They met Rahab. And what does God do for the second time in miraculous fashion? He opens up the Jordan River, and it says it was during a flood season. So the people needed a miracle. And the Levites went before them. I like this verse in Joshua chapter 3, verse 4. This is a New Year's verse for me. I always think of this verse in New Year's, where it says in Joshua 3:4, he says that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore, up to this point. So you haven't gone this way. You know, when you go a new way and you've not gone, that's especially a time you have to what? I have to trust God. I have to trust God. I haven't gone this way. Well, every day is actually a day like that, isn't it? We need to trust God every day. So Joshua prepares the people. He challenges them. He says, the living God is among you, verse 10. And then when the big toes of the priest hit the Jordan River, literally, when the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped into the rim of the Jordan, verse 15. And the Jordan overflow with all his banks, all the time of harvest. I'm in Joshua 3:15. And verse 17 says, as the water stood up, and Joni, could you read that? You have Joshua 3:17, please.
Joshua 3:17. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant, right?
Yes,
Oh, okay. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on the dry ground, in the midst of Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all people were passing over Jordan.
Okay. So, I found in the Bible that there were 3 times God miraculously opened up rivers. The first time, of course, was the Red Sea for Israel. Where was the enemy when God opened up the Red Sea? In relationship to Israel, where they were behind them. Okay. Here, God opens up the river. But where's the enemy in relationship to Israel, in a sense? They're in front of them. They're going into the battle. They know when they cross that river, they're going into battle. They've already surveyed the city, the walls, Jericho. They're heading to Jericho. So the battle's in front of them. So God opened up the Red Sea with the battle behind them to say, I'm victorious. God opened up the Jordan River with the battle in front of them, giving them the promise, I am victorious. You can trust me. And the other time God opened up a river miraculously was for who? And Elisha. He was with Elijah and Elisha. And it was the last day of Elijah's life. So that's an amazing thing that he didn't open up the river for a whole nation, just for 2 people. But I believe the context is the same. Battle, spiritual battle for Elijah and Elisha. Not necessarily a physical battle. They weren't physical warriors, but they were fighting a great spiritual battle. And the enemy was really all around them spiritually, into all the false worship that had permeated and infiltrated in the land. So anyway, that's how God opened up the rivers 3 times in the Bible. Okay, so they cross the Jordan River and their campaigns begin. And of course, the Battle of Jericho, very interesting battle. Now, Jericho is not far from the Jordan River, but it's a hill country, and it's kind of, I guess, at the foothills here in the Rift Valley before they go up into the land. But it was a trade area, and it was just on the other side of the Jordan here. So it was a prominent city in the land even then. And it was heavily guarded with walls. We know that. So the first campaign, number 1 there, is the Battle of Jericho, a strategic city that was kind of like a gateway into the land of promise. So there is a tell of Jericho to this day. And this is the tell, and even if you were to see it. And then this is a rendition, perhaps a model of what the city could have looked like in the area in which that tell is now. Okay, so they went against Jericho. That was the first battle that they fought. And then from there, they went on to the Battle of Ai. Okay, so they went across now the Jordan River to Jericho. They went to Ai. And remember what they said about Ai. This is a piece of cake, We don't have to send everybody over there to fight. It's just a small little city. And boy, they got their clocks clean. As they say, they got their clocks clean. They didn't trust God, and then they had to deal with sin, the sin of Achan, and that's why they actually lost against a small, and that showed them right off the bat. You can defeat the cities you don't think you have the power to defeat if you trust me, and you won't be able to win the battles that you think are a piece of cake if you don't trust me. So there's no battle that's easy for us. The big days where we have big meetings and real challenging things planned, we're like, wow, I don't know how I'm going to get to. We need God those days. But you know what? Even those normal days where you're like, just another normal day, easy day, piece of cake. We need to trust God just as much those days, right? I think that's the lesson there. So we could see in our map here, Ai. Do you see it on the map? We're on page 79. I don't know if I like these maps particularly. Boy, you have to really get out your glasses. But do you see Jericho? It's good to see so they They send the spies over. They cross then the Jordan River. They attack to Jericho, and then they go up into Ai, which is west and a little bit north of Jericho. You see it? Excuse me?
What number?
Map 36 on page 79. Yeah, and if you find Jericho and you follow the yellow line, not the red line that goes straight across, but there's a yellow line that goes up. That's into Ai. You see it? Okay. So this is in the midst of the hill country. And that's where they do an ambush. Remember they go behind them and then they pretend like they're running away from the front, and then the ones behind attack the city. Okay, so this was the central campaign, really, just Jericho and then defeating Ai. And then it goes from the southern campaign to the northern, or to the, I'm sorry, the central campaign to the southern. He went to the Southlands, and that's the same map in our book on page 79, map number 36. So letter B is the southern campaigns. So here God does another miracle. This is where he rains the hailstones, heavenly hailstones, and the sun stands still for the day so that they can complete the conquest. And the verse is 14 is a fabulous verse where it says, there was no day like that. That's a good day to have. Wow. There was no day like that one. Or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man. For the Lord fought for Israel. Yes, Lord, fight our battles. Hearken to our prayers. We need you, God. We need God to hear our prayers, don't we? And fight our battles. Because he was the one fighting for his people. They could not have won these battles without the Lord. So in this chapter, verse 1, it says, it came to pass when Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, had heard how Joshua had taken Ai, had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and her king. So he had done to Ai and her king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them. Remember the Gibeonites, they pretended like they were from far away because they didn't want to fight. So they actually dissembled. They pretended like they were, and help, just take us in, And it turned out that they weren't from far away, but then they had made an agreement with them. So they heard about that peace treaty between the Gibeonites and Israel, and that made them more afraid, it says, because Gibeon was a city that they didn't want to fight against. Now they were going to have to fight against Gibeon and Israel. So verse 3, Adoni-Zedek sent to Hobam, the king of Hebron, and then to Piram, king of Jarmuth, to Japhiah, king of Lachish, to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, come up. So we got all those cities, Bible geography. Those are the verses you just read over in your devotions. So let's find these cities. Okay, Jerusalem. That's right in the middle of the hill country, right here. If you could find that on your map. Now, if you follow, this is the central and southern campaign map. Again, you're on there on page 79. Do you see Jerusalem? It's just below the red line, actually. So there we have Jerusalem. That's the king. Even then, he was the king maker. He was bringing these other kings together. So we had Jerusalem. And then we have Hebron. Do you see Hebron? Wow.
Hebron is down with the arrow. Their arrow.
Okay, yep, down here. Thank you, Edgar. I found them all, and Hebron is down in here. And Debir is mentioned, isn't it? That's one of the kings. Yeah, that's right below it. Lachish is over here. So we have Hebron and Jarmuth.
Right there.
Right there. Yep. There's Jarmuth here. This is like the Easter egg hunt. The king of Lachish over here. I don't do them anymore, don't worry. And the king of Eglon. We found him already somewhere, right? Didn't we?
West of there. Pastor, where's
Okay.
Jarmuth again?
Who? Jarmuth is here.
But it's not on the map of the book?
No,
No, right?
No.
Okay.
yeah, grad number 36.
Trying to see Lachish. I don't know if Eglon is actually on this map. It's in our book.
Yeah.
It's in our book. No wonder I couldn't find it. Okay? So now some of these cities, though, if you notice, where are they located?
In the shuffle.
In the Shvela. I think that's at least how I heard it said. I like that. I like the sound of that. Shvela. It looks like Shephelah. I know. That's what I was saying until, but they said it's just Shvela. So, and the Shvela is what? It's the lowlands. And these cities, actually Lachish is an important city in the Bible. And for any king who sought to attack Jerusalem, that seemed to have been an important city to take first because, for example, when Babylon came against Jerusalem, they first knocked out all these cities. And I think Lachish was one of the most difficult cities for him to overcome. But if they could overtake these cities, then it would break down resistance for them to go into Jerusalem. But anyway, so this was the southern campaign. So it was a coalition, number one, of how many kings? 5 kings gathered together to fight Israel. The king of, who was the first king? Mentioned there, the king of Jerusalem. So the southern campaign was 5 kings led by the king of Jerusalem. That would be a good thing to know. The southern campaign was a coalition of 5 kings led by the king of Jerusalem. The central campaign was essentially Jericho and Ai, those 2 cities. So the Lord discomfited them, it says, before Israel, and then they got them running. They sent them on the run. And
So wasn't this the southern campaign?
the southern campaign. Did I say northern?
This is central?
Okay, the first campaign was the central campaign. That's letter B.
The letters.
That's letter B, which is into Jericho and Ai. That's the central. So this map is showing 2. Really, it's showing the central campaign into Jericho and Ai,
Pastor, there's
and then the
letter
southern
B's.
campaign this way.
There's 2 letter B's in that.
Oh, so that's, okay, there you go. So that should be letter B1. No, I'm just kidding. We'll just make it letter C. It's not the first time that's happened. So now we have 2C, just back. So then across the page, the northern campaign would be D. So thank you.
You also have 2 twos.
Okay. Yeah, I do. I try. How can I say? I know you're such a smart class, so you can count from 2 to 3. You got it. Just seeing if you catch. I'm gonna put some mistakes in here. These mistakes are actually purposeful.
That should give some
That's right.
credit on the
That's
test. Because if you mistake.
No.
the class.
No, it's not a mistake. I like this guy. I've done it all on purpose. I want to see if you're paying attention. No. Okay, so what's interesting here now is point number 2 for the first. Okay, so here we got 2, and we have that other point 3. So at the top of page 41, the Lord discomfited them before Israel. From Gilgal, it says in verse, if you look at chapter 10, verse 9, it says they went up from Gilgal all night, and okay, let's find Gilgal there. here. Okay, from Gilgal. So Gilgal was really where that was their base. That was their base region. Up here was Gilgal. And so verse 9, here's the cities. It discomfited them and slew them with a great slaughter at Gibeon here. That's verse 10. Chased them along the way that goeth up to Beth Horon. And looking for Beth Horon here, but along this way.
It's by Ai.
Yeah, and then it says, and smote them to Azekah, and unto Makkedah, which is, I know that's in our book.
Right there in the middle. Right there.
Yeah, from Azekah to Makkedah. Okay, so all these places are mentioned right there. And then verse 11, it came to pass as they fled from before Israel and were going down to Beth Horon that the Lord cast down the stones from heaven unto Azekah, and they died. So in this area, they cast down the stones, they died. Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, up here. So this whole battle was fought in this region. And he says, and now moon in the valley of Ajalon. So look for that in your, I don't think it's kind of right under Beth Horon on your map. It cuts across the red line as it starts heading south, the valley of Ajalon. So all these regions are mentioned. So many cities and everything mentioned. But then after defeating these kings, he continued by capturing other cities in the south. And so chapter 10, verse 28 and following, it says he took Makkedah and he smote it. And then in verse 29, it says he passed from Makkedah, all Israel with him, unto Libnah, and fought against Libnah. So from Makkedah to Libnah. Do you see that on your map? That's off the red line, kind of like jutting eastward. Libnah.
Pastor, in our book, if it has a question mark, what does it mean?
That means they're not exactly
okay.
sure where that city is. Yeah. Okay, and then it keeps going then. To Lachish, and we mentioned some of these already, and to Eglon, and then Hebron and Debir and the villages and their kings in the Negeb. So go all the way down to chapter 10. So he mentions, like, if you just scanning, look at verse 34, Eglon. Passed unto Eglon, fought against it, and they took it. Verse 36, Hebron. Here's Hebron. And then verse 38, Debir, which is below Hebron.
That's the blank?
That's verse 30. Is that the blank? No, not yet. Hebron, Debir, and all the villages and their kings. Then it says, okay, here, verse 40. Says, and so Joshua smote all the country of the hills. Okay, remember our geography, the hill country, and of the south, that's the Negeb, and the vale, and of the springs and their kings. He left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel commanded. Joshua smote them. Now watch this. This is the blank. From where? Kadesh Barnea. Where was Kadesh Barnea? That's way south. Remember, we even said there's maybe different views of where Kadesh Barnea is, but if you look your map, if you go to the page on page 78, the lengthened, the enlarged map there, Kadesh Barnea is on the left-hand side of that map and kind of in the southernmost region. And that's where Israel was their encampment during their wilderness journeys. They went all the way. So they went way down, even below this map here, to Kadesh Barnea, trying to defeat as many. So to me, that was pretty amazing and stunning that they carried the battle all the way down into Kadesh Barnea. Unto Gaza, to Gaza. Now that's on this side over here. So there you go, unto Gaza. So they went down from Kadesh Barnea south and then to the coast. And again, I'm reading in verse 41, to Gaza and all the country of Goshen, even unto Gibeon. And up here, back again, trying to clean it out. And obviously, they didn't get everybody. I mean, now, a lot of people are very offended with this battle strategy that God had commanded. This was God's commandment to Joshua. Why do you believe God used this strategy of real absolute devastation and destruction of killing?
Yes.
Because of the corruption that was there. And the corruption, again, what kind of people were there? The Nephilim were there. The Nephilim, that's right, the giants were there. And those giant peoples, I believe, go back even pre-flood to those sons of God who were impregnating the daughters of men, and a race of giants, of hybrid angel men formed that was the very enemies of God to pollute the human race and to destroy the Messiah and the messianic promise. So it was almost as if the devil knew God's plan for Israel. God had told Abraham he was giving him this land. And so the devil led his giant peoples there to fight against the people of God and to thwart the promise of God, to keep the Messiah from being born. So I think ultimately that's one of the main reasons why this battle was so devastating and destructive. Yes, Mondell?
So are you saying that they survived the flood? Or these are also...
I'm saying that somehow that giant gene did. So, and again, we're not exactly sure, but the best bet would be to say that through one of the wives of, probably the wife of Ham, since he said, cursed be Canaan, and it was the Canaanite peoples, and so Canaan came forth from Ham. So perhaps the wife of Ham had some remnant of that gene. Again, that's an educated, I guess, if you will. But somehow we do know this: there were giants before the flood and there were giants after the flood. So how did that happen? That's probably the best way to say that it did happen. And Ryan Peterson, in his book, The Judgment of the Nephilim, does bring that out. And, I really believe, and honestly, when I did consider more of those sons of God and how they developed through, in that time before the flood, and then the giants before and after, and really just, why did God just destroy like the entire earth, And then now here's another judgment. Why is God destroying entire people groups? And I really believe it's just because of the absolute hatred that those people groups had of God and of his promise, and because they were really they were not God's people, although God could save them, and he did save Rahab. But that one verse where it says that Abraham was perfect in his generations. Did I say Abraham? Noah was perfect in his generations. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. I believe that talks about that Noah and his sons, at least, were not infected with that satanic or that giant gene of whatever Satan was doing to corrupt the human gene pool. And I believe Satan's on another mission to corrupt the gene pool with all of this stuff that's going on, all the cloning and robotics and computer chips. I don't know what's happening with all this crazy world we're living in. Anyway. Okay, so let's get a little further here. So letter D now is the northern campaign. And oh, by the way, so this is Gezer. Gezer was one of the cities in that southern campaign. I had written down the verse. Anyway, this is the city of Gezer that I found online. I think it was verse 33, is it? Yeah, verse 10. This is Joshua 10:33. Then Horam, king of Gezer, came up to help Lachish. So this is a tell of Gezer. So this is the kind of region that Joshua and his armies were fighting in that southern campaign. Okay, then the northern campaign. So after they went to the south, now they come north. And the leader of this northern campaign is the king of Hazor. And there's a whole page on him on page 81, Hazor, the head of all those kingdoms. And so now we're in Joshua chapter 11. So it says Jabin, king of Hazor. So who was the leader of the kings of the southern campaign? The king of Jerusalem. Who was the leader of the kings of the northern campaign? The king of Hazor. Okay? He led the coalition of the northern kings. So if we can remember that. Hazor was located 9 miles north of the Sea of Galilee. So here it is. 9 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, was a point on the international trade route. So it was also an influential city because of that. Number 3, he was joined by the king of Miram, Shimron, Aksath, at the waters. If you look in Genesis chapter 11, what's the blank there? Joshua chapter 11, verse 5. Joshua chapter 11, verse 5. When all these kings were met together, they came and pitched together at the waters of Miram. Okay? And it also says the Canaanite on the east and on the west, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Jebusites in the mountains, the Hivites under Hermon. They went out, they and all their hosts with them, much people. So the kings are mentioned in verse 1, and then there are different people groups. And this is on page 80 in our book, map number 37. These areas up here. Okay. So you see Hazor, that's right, just north of the Sea of Galilee. That did not exist in New Testament times. It had been destroyed by these wars. Okay, Shimron. You see Shimron, that's, if you follow that yellow line around, you can see Aksif first, you see that? And then Shimron, and that's just north of the Jezreel Valley. Again, that was a main crossing route in this area, so they would cross through there, and then they would go up through Hazor. And on page 80 is a tell of Hazor. And that was the largest, and it says on page 81, one of the most important Canaanite city-states before Joshua's destruction of that city. We'll meet him again. We'll meet Hazor again, I believe in the book of Judges. Okay, so then even after these different campaigns, the central campaign, the southern campaign, the northern campaign, it still says in Joshua chapter 11 and it says in 18, Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. That's verse 18. And verse 23, it says he took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. So after that initial battle, it was like they didn't want to fight with Israel, at least at that point. There was rest. So this was when he distributed the land, and we're just going to finish up this page 41. I knew I had written Joshua. That's out of order. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. I forgot about this. Is a good slide. So here's from Miram, and here's the different. In this campaign, here's Hazor. They came over to Miram, and then this is some of the areas where they fought all throughout this region, up and down. Medan, Shimron, Aksaf, Misrephoth Maim, and so forth. Okay, I thought that was a pretty good. Okay, so then the distribution of the land. Tribal allotments are described by boundary descriptions, list of cities. But letter B is the Levitical cities. So if you look on page 86, map 40, and we're not going to pinpoint all 21 Levitical cities or 48 cities.
That's a nice one.
Okay, Joshua 21 contains a list of the 48 cities. And I don't know what that word is supposed to be in your notes. What's that word? You see that? I can't even. I would say given. I don't know what happened on that one. Okay, I'm sorry about that. That's a pretty bad misspelling. You can make up your own word since I was making up mine. Okay, so there were 48 Levitical cities, and those cities are all here, and they're all listed in the Bible. Let's see. In Joshua chapter 20, that's 21 is the Cities of Refuge. Contains a list. Joshua 21 contains a list of the 48 cities given to the Levitical people. So what is God doing in this, though? By spreading the Levites around. What were they to do? They were to teach the people the word of God. And so God spread them around in order to spread that salt, if you will, the influence of God's word throughout the land. And actually, it's kind of how God turned for Levi a curse into a blessing. You know how how did God turn the curse into a blessing for Levi? If you go back to Genesis and to Jacob when he is giving the blessings to his sons, some of them were not the greatest blessings, but in Genesis chapter 49 and verse 5, he says, Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. Remember what they did? They went and they attacked the men of Shechem when they had defiled Dinah, Simeon and Levi. And so verse 7 says, cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, it was cruel. Now look what he says. What does he say then? I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. That was a curse because of their anger. He was going to divide them in the land, which is what he does in the Levitical cities. But this curse is turned into a blessing. How come? What did the Levites do? What famous man was of the tribe of Levi. Moses. And if you go to Exodus chapter 32, when Moses came down the mountain and the people were worshiping that golden calf, remember his great challenge, who is on the Lord's side? This is Exodus chapter 32, verse 26. Who gathered themselves to Moses? And the sons of Levi gathered themselves. So they stood for God. They had a warrior spirit. And so God, because again of Israel's sin, he wanted the whole nation to be a kingdom of priests. And really, the church is the ultimate fulfillment, I think, of God's heart, to make everyone a priest. That was what God wanted. But because of the sins of the people, God chose the Levites for this. And they were to stand, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 8, Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 8, at that time, the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister unto him, and to bless his name. Wherefore, Levi, Deuteronomy 10, verse 9, hath no part nor inheritance with his brethren. The Lord is his inheritance, according as the Lord thy God promised him. So the Levites did not have an allotment of land. They were given these cities, but God blessed them in this. He gave them himself to be their inheritance. The Lord was their inheritance, the best inheritance. Okay, and then the last thing here are the cities of refuge. And there were 5 of them. We can pinpoint these, and they're actually on the map also. And they're easier to find because you see the red dots on, this is on page 86. So you'll see there's 3 on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and south is Bezer. You see this, we're on the eastern side of the Jordan, Transjordan, Bezer, and that was in the tribe of who? Reuben. Then Ramoth Gilead, which would be kind of on the border, but on the tribe of Gad, I think it's still in the purple there, Gad, but on the border. And then Golan, which is in Manasseh. And then if you start at the north and work down, on the west side is Kadesh in Naphtali, and Shechem in Manasseh, and Hebron. There's Hebron again. So these were the cities of refuge. If somebody had mistakenly killed somebody, they could flee there until their case was adjudicated and so forth. And they had different laws and rules, but these cities of refuge. There were 6 cities of refuge, 48 cities for the Levites. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
Roger, what's letter C for 41? Sorry.
Letter C, the last blank, you mean? That last, cities of refuge.
Oh, thank you.
Cities of refuge. Okay, so you should know there were 6 cities of refuge. There were 48 Levitical cities. And then we emphasized already about the different campaigns. And our quiz is, do we have a quiz next? No class next week. I'm going to be preaching in Maryland, so pray for me. I'll be preaching Monday night and Tuesday night at a Foundation Baptist Fellowship Conference. So then we will have a quiz, not the week after either I get back. Oh, that's going to have a lot of information on that next. We're going to have a quiz April 22nd. So, but you know what's going to happen when you take that quiz? It's just like when God opened up the rock and the water came out. God's going to open up your brain, and all that information is just going to come out. And you're going to get all the answers right. Hallelujah.